Right. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I'm gonna invite everyone to say hello in the chat window, and hold on a sec. Yeah, let us know where you are, where you're joining us from, and really excited to have another session of APIsec University presents. This is a super exciting conversation here with Sam Curry. We're talking about hacking APIs and how he was able to really successfully hack so many car makers, gain really remarkable access to various vehicles, things like locking and unlocking car doors, starting and stopping engines, turning on webcams, taking over accounts, accessing back-end systems. Really remarkable. Sam, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Really looking forward to this conversation. This is by far our record attendance for an APIsec University session. What's really remarkable with your research is how you went about it, and also just like what it took to be successful. I mean, in a lot of cases, VIN numbers, which are plainly visible to anyone on the street, email addresses, things like that. So to get things started, we were joined by Sam Curry. He's a researcher who kind of took a look at cars and decided to start seeing what he could find. It's really incredible research that he performed. Let me pull that up here real quick. This is Sam. You can follow him at SamWCYO. Highly recommended. Great stuff on his social and at his blog. This blog that he posted at the beginning of the year is really incredible read. Highly recommend it for everyone. So before we dive in, Sam, maybe give us a little bit of your background. How did you get to where you are? What keeps you busy these days?
Yeah, sure. I've been doing kind of like security research for the last like 4 or 5 years, but I got started in bug bounty, I think about like 7 or probably maybe even like 8 years ago. But I did like full time on HackerOne, Bugcrowd, Synac for a long time, and I eventually started doing like consulting. Then I think a few years ago we started a consulting company, and the consulting company got like acquired by a company called Yuga Labs, where we just kind of do like run their security team and do like a bunch of ethical hacking. This talk is completely unrelated to my employer, but it's like the research that we did was all like kind of personal research. So right now, like a lot of this stuff is kind of like my night job. Like I'll finish up and switch to the good computer.
Sure. Yeah, no doubt. And so give us just like maybe the 40,000 foot view of this project that you and your buddies started, I guess late last year. What did you do? What inspired you to look at cars? How'd you go about it?
Yeah, so this bit of research is actually from a few like really great people. They're all listed in the blog post, but we're kind of like a group of friends who does a bunch of security stuff. But with this research in particular, I think like maybe 6 months ago or fall of 2022, we were doing like a road trip to kind of get away from cybersecurity stuff because we wanted to break for a little bit. And we drove to a college campus to see a friend. And like while we were at the college campus, we needed to like go from, someplace that was like half a mile away to another place. And we decided to take like the electric scooters, right? And when we took the electric scooters, we realized all the electric scooters were like hooked up to this app. And the app was like, we kind of looked into it for a little bit more, and we realized it's just like these API calls, and you could basically like locate and ping each scooter. And like while we were messing with it, and this is a campus of like 50,000 people, it's 3 a.m. We hit an API call and we hear this like beeping all across campus. And we kind of look out and like there's just scooters everywhere, just like beeping and flashing their headlights. So like, yeah, this was like it got us really interested, because if you think about like vehicles, a lot of vehicles are like the same way, where they have like an app and it's just like connected to the internet. So we were like, if we can do this with electric scooters, we should just look into like cars. So it kind of kicked off like a 3-month research project.
Yeah, pretty amazing. So like that 3 a.m. thing, I mean, it doesn't sound like it even took you all that long to, I mean, what were you doing? You were like pulling up the mobile app for the scooters, and then what were you doing? Like sniffing API calls or
Yeah,
something?
so we kind of dragged the scooter upstairs to the dorm room. We snuck it past the security guard. But once we got into the dorm, we like just we proxied it and we used Frida to remove SSL pinning. But we were basically just proxying like the scooter's mobile app through our phone and intercepting the HTTP traffic.
Yeah, and then were you like just manipulating calls and did you even need to authenticate to this mobile app?
Yeah, you had to create an account, like they had like a user registration. But once you're authenticated, basically what it had was like a geolocation of the scooters in your vicinity. So you'd give it like coordinates,
Yeah.
and return a list of scooters. But there's like different things you could do to like unlock the scooter, like you scan the QR code, you click a button. But I think the actual HTTP request basically like took in a wild card. So when we were messing with it, we threw in a wild card, and I think it activated all the scooters.
Oh, no kidding. That's pretty amazing. Pretty amazing. And so you hacked the scooter, and then like spontaneously, you guys were like, "Let's go see what we can do with cars." What was the appeal of going after cars?
Yeah, so there's a guy named Spectres, Nico Rivera, and he's like a super talented like hardware hacker. And he does a lot of really cool like car hacks, like the actual really cool stuff where like you hack like a key fob. And he hit us up because he's like, well, I want to hack these like cars, but there's all these like web APIs that I'm not like super familiar with. So he kind of invited us because he knew that we were doing like a lot of like web API security. So we kind of transitioned over that where we're spending time like doing specifically like web and API security for vehicles.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty amazing stuff. And like I said, for everyone on the call, this blog goes into a ton of detail. I mean, you got screenshots in there. You even have a video hacking your your friend's car. He walks up to it, opens the door, it's unlocked. There you go.
Yeah.
Pretty amazing stuff. Pretty amazing stuff. So let's dig into some of the nitty gritty here, right? And for everyone, by the way, on the call. Throw your questions in, right? I mean, I'm sure you've got interesting questions for Sam, so feel free to pop them into the chat. It looks like we've got folks from literally every corner of the globe, and I really appreciate everyone joining here. So you were able to do things like lock and unlock car doors, start and stop engines. So those are sort of vehicle related. Then you had a whole other category, which was like account related, right? Like taking over people's accounts, and in some cases you could even change ownership of a vehicle. Like, what's that about? What does that even mean?
Yeah, so one component of like the vehicle security, a lot of companies like BMW and Mercedes-Benz, they're actually like pretty secure fundamentally from an app level, right? Like if you download the Mercedes-Benz app and you want to connect it to your vehicle to like lock and unlock it, it won't actually let you, and there's like a lot of interesting authorization behind it. For Mercedes-Benz in particular, I think you actually have to go to a dealership and you have to ask the dealer to add your account to the vehicle, right? Versus, I think like if you have like a Kia or Hyundai, you actually do the registration yourself, where you can like confirm it, or you're supposed
Sure.
to confirm it in the infotainment system. But
Yeah,
it really got us thinking for like, well, if we want to hack these like kind of bigger name companies like Mercedes-Benz or BMW, we can focus instead on like the actual dealer security, right? Because if I can't, bypass the actual authorization of it, maybe I can just take over the dealer account or take over some component of the dealer functionality. So it kind of got us interested in that.
Yeah, well, that's what I saw in your write-up. Like one of the themes that seemed to pop out was weak single sign-on or app control. So maybe you can share an example or two there. But it looked like you were finding various portals, single sign-on portals, and finding your way in, but then pivoting into other apps that really you shouldn't have had access to. Is that more or less right?
100%. So for Mercedes-Benz in particular, I think we found the vulnerability that basically let us like register to their core SSO portal. And when we found it, we reported it, and we're basically like, hey, this is giving us like a core SSO account. This is really bad. They kind of responded initially. They're like, well, could you prove impact here? And we're like, gladly, we'll definitely like try to. So we looked into it, and we basically we found there's like like GitLab and there's a billion different internal tools that we could sign into. So we kind of like click, logged in, took a screenshot, and backed out.
Yeah. And so from there, you were actually now acting as a dealer, right? You were actually, and so you could authorize vehicles, you could authorize accounts.
Yeah, exactly. So for BMW, for Mercedes-Benz, we actually never made it to the dealer application, but for BMW and Rolls-Royce, we were able to. So for BMW and Rolls-Royce, you basically got access to the same portal they have when you're at a car dealership, and we had like all privileges for any car dealership. And what that basically meant is you can take a VIN number or like an email address, you can query it, find the account, and then add yourself to the vehicle. And same thing with the vehicle APIs. Like there's a ton of like really interesting API functionality where it's like retrieving sales documents, retrieving owner information. Um, it's the same, sales data that they'd have access to, and then the same kind of like authorization tools to add you to vehicles.
Yeah, I mean, pretty remarkable. And so another one of the tactics that you seem to use was to kind of dissect the apps themselves, right? So you were looking for JavaScript, you were looking for things inside the code. What tell us more about that technique? Like, what were you doing? What were you looking for? What kind of gems were you finding in the code itself?
Yeah, 100%. So like mobile apps are super interesting because like they're basically just these like APIs that are like baked into a mobile app, right? So when you're on your phone, it's just a website you're talking to. But with the mobile apps in particular, like we wanted to find like a common link between all the vehicle telematics services, because we kind of figured that like all these companies kind of all came out with telematics all at once, right? So our guess was that like there was probably some like central company that was like powering all telematics, or like a few, right? So when we like went after the mobile apps, our goal was to try to find like common themes across the different apps. So what we did is kind of like we used like reverse APK tools, and we basically focused on like the Android versions of the apps. And then once we had the APKs installed, we ran a bunch of like free decompilers to just pull out the web APIs. And we kind of immediately realized there was like common trends, right? They all pointed to a website called telematics.net or SiriusXM. I think technically it's like SiriusXM Connected Vehicle Services is the company name. But
Yeah.
once you did that, you pulled out like the actual like core functionality to like lock, unlock, and start cars, and then that's where you can really get like start fuzzing.
So you were sort of reverse engineering. So were these like compiled or obfuscated code, and then you were kind of breaking it apart, and what were you looking for in the code itself? What kind of things were standing out to you?
Yeah, for me, with like focus on like web security, like my core focus was just pulling out like anything that actually did the functionality, right? So there's a comment in the chat where it's like, do you have to actually own the vehicle to test it? The answer is no, but it makes it like a lot easier, right? Like if you own a 2022 BMW or something that's connected to your phone, you can like log into an account, send the HTTP request, and you can like intercept it like pretty easily. But if you don't own a BMW, you kind of have to like sit there and like try to like slowly piece it together of how it actually works. So the goal there, right, was just like, okay, we have the app and we have like all these like endpoints, and we kind of have to like work through like, obtain token, use token, unlock vehicle, right? So once we had that flow, that's when you can really start like hammering at it and then try to find like authorization vulnerabilities.
And were you looking for like keys? And I remember you talked about constants. Sometimes you were finding pointers to internal APIs or base URLs. I mean, sounds like there was a wealth of information in this code.
Yeah, 100%. Like the actual source of these apps is like really, really interesting because like, if you're a developer at like, let's say BMW and you're developing this app, like you're going to be commenting like, internal-jira.bmw.com, see here for details, because you're a developer at the company, right? So you're kind of working within that environment. And then at the same time, you're also kind of assuming that, most people, it does take a little bit of effort to like decompile the app. So like, you're probably a little bit more like, you're committing a lot of secrets, just thinking that maybe people won't see it. So when we're looking through these apps, like a goal, if we could find like for instance a secret for SiriusXM that lets us authenticate as the company, it'd be like super valuable. So we keep our eye open for like secrets like that, right?
Yeah, no, pretty amazing. And it so this sort of pivots to another related theme that I saw, which is discovering endpoints that certainly existed, but seems like weren't meant to be discovered. Is that what you were finding? Plenty of examples of these?
Yeah, 100%. Like a lot of content discovery is like always fun because like as an end user, we're only supposed to get access to API to like do what we're supposed to do, right? But if I'm a developer of the company and I'm frustrated trying to make the app, I'm gonna maybe add like a /debug endpoint so I can test it to validate stuff, right? So trying to discover these endpoints is like really valuable because it's like we found one, I think, while we were testing, where it's just like a full authorization bypass. It was like generate tokens for like customer email or something like that, where it was basically some developer wanted to have their own portal where they could kind of just like in their own testing environment, they could just test in like, God mode access where they just throw in their email and get the token and do whatever. But we found it, so.
No, it's incredible what you were able to find, right? And I've met with many orgs, and some of them, I talked to one company, security company no less, where they have their published APIs, but they acknowledge that there are more APIs that their website uses, their mobile uses, and so forth. And they were pretty transparent about, like, yeah, we sort of expect people are going to find these, and in their case, they're actually kind of okay with that. But I think there's generally a feeling that if we bury these APIs, these endpoints, make them difficult to discover, that they're probably going to be okay. They're probably going to be safe. But I think your research kind of kills that notion of security.
Yeah, 100%. Like the obfuscation bit is always we're looking.
Yeah, no doubt. And so there's obfuscation. So like trying to make your code complicated and convoluted and difficult to interpret. But then there's like there's burying interesting detail within there. I mean, how long have we been talking about not hard coding API keys? And it sounds like you found plenty of them and put them to good use.
Yeah, 100%. We actually, oops, sorry, beeping in my camera. Ignore me. But yeah, I actually met with a couple people from Truffle Hog yesterday who do basically exactly that, like secret discovery and stuff. And it's like just talking to them. It's like a whole enterprise where it's like people just keep doing it over and over. So.
Yeah, no, it's pretty amazing. And in some cases, those single sign-on portals. So we've talked about kind of the obfuscation and kind of burying gems and making them hard to find, but still discoverable. But then the other was you were able to get into these sign-on portals and then gain access to all kinds of internal systems, right? So can you talk about what you were able to find and what kind of access you got and what sort of impact that could have?
Yeah, 100%. So there's a question in chat talking about like ECUs, right? And just to clarify a little bit, like the scope of the research we wanted to do is basically like anything involving like a SIM card connected to a vehicle, right? So like as a person who likes to have fun, I really like the idea of having like a mobile app where you type in a VIN number or email address and you kind of take over that person's vehicle. So that's kind of the goal of the research, is to basically create this tool where, if I want to honk your vehicle, I can do it. So that was kind of like the original like scope of the research, like anything connected, right? So throughout the research, our goal was kind of to focus on like these, some of the systems do actually like touch the ECU, like for instance, like even though they're very like limited or restricted, like starting the engine or like starting the car, unlocking the car, stuff like that. While other systems are like completely disconnected from the car and it's only like PII, right? Like if I want to leak your email address or something using your VIN number, I can do that, right?
Sure.
So another big part of the research that we did is we were actually curious too about like there are these companies like Spireon, right? And Spireon is this like massive parent company with like all these other like sub companies, but their core product is basically like a little chip that you stick in the car, and the chip has like a SIM card in it, right? And it basically works by connecting to your ECU, and you can do stuff like killing the starter, where like you're no longer able to start the car, and then also like tracking vehicles, right? So Spireon's biggest customers,
Yep.
yeah, they're like they have like a direct to sales or direct to customer products where they're like, tracking, if you want to track your car for fun, right? Or you basically just want to know where your car is at. They'll sell you that. But at the same time, they also sell it to like police fleets, ambulances, semi trucks, right? And all those devices are kind of like they sit somewhere within the car that allow you to do stuff like disable the starter or track the vehicle, right? So part of our research is basically like if someone were able to hack Spireon, they're able to basically take over like 3 million devices, right? Where they could basically disable the starter or like track the vehicles. So we focused on like hacking Spireon because it's like kind of it's basically exactly what we're looking for, right? So like, we basically found with Spireon, we were able to do that. Like we found a few administrative endpoints, we found a few like injection vulnerabilities, and we're able to like completely take over like super administrator accounts on these like public apps. where you just type in a device serial number, VIN number, email address, like anything, you're able to retrieve that person's like full PII, right? And then like invite yourself to like a police fleet or ambulance fleet, and then you can just manage the vehicles, right? So it was kind of scary to us because like, you know, a lot of people with the car research, I think they really expect now is like, well, can you hack the ECU? Like, can I change the steering, right? And the Spireon vulnerability is interesting because
Yeah.
it's like, you know, these ECU vulnerabilities are touching that where it's like you can send like custom commands that get basically parsed through that vehicle system, and it's like kind of spooky. So
So yeah, I mean, you're going where I was wondering, like, you know, it's one thing to unlock a door or even, you know, turn on a camera or, you know, start an engine, but you know, with these third party sort of fleet management, vehicle management, it's almost like the car makers are inviting a trusted third party into the vehicle, right? It's probably even a hardware component that has got direct access into vehicle activities, right? Starting engine, stopping engine. And what you found is that third party could also be vulnerable and then make the whole car at
yeah,
risk.
100%. Like I think in this case, like a lot of dealers like use Spireon. So if you go to buy like a car from a dealership, a lot of dealers will actually throw this device into the vehicle when they resell it to you because like if you're not making payments, they can just disable your starter remotely. And it's kind of spooky because yeah,
Right.
like they're able to like track your vehicle, stuff like that. And I'm sure like this stuff isn't being properly authorized. Like I'm sure that like it's it's super clear that like a lot of this, you know, nobody's making sure that like you are the only person who can view your vehicle's location. Like they definitely can view it too,
Yeah.
right? So it's just very spooky.
No doubt. I'm actually one of those. I've probably been hacked multiple times in your blog. I actually have one of those electronic license plates, and where you can customize the message and so forth. And geez, in that case, you got full super admin access into their backend system. Good news is all they could do is, you know, report my car stolen or change my message to something embarrassing. But did you ever find situations where you could actually perform a dangerous activity like slam the brakes or turn the steering wheel or something that could actually cause harm to
Yeah,
life?
so the only thing is with the Spireon devices, you're able to do remote commands to the vehicle, but sorry about this beeping. Um,
No
yeah,
worries,
with the
no worries.
Spireon devices, you're able to like send these commands to vehicles, but like a lot of them are like set up in a way where it's kind of like untrusted, and it's not going to be able to do like core commands. We never actually ended up testing. When we reported the vulnerability to them, like we didn't actually own the physical device, so we weren't able to really continue the testing. But I'd say that's probably the closest we got,
Yeah.
right? Like starting someone's engine while it's in their garage, things like that, right? Um, but yeah, the focus of the research was totally
Yeah.
different. So
Yes. I mean, it's interesting. At the very least, you know, starting a car in a garage could create a super hazardous condition. But I wonder if there's actually some level of separation of you know, church and state, where yeah, it's one thing to unlock a car door, but it's another thing to apply brakes. Like, you know, is there actually an endpoint for apply the brakes or, you know, perform an emergency stop or
yeah,
something?
so there definitely is, right? So for instance, like Tesla has a, and we weren't able to find vulnerabilities in this, but Tesla basically has an API where you're able to call it, and basically it starts the vehicle to do like um, a remote pickup, right? Like if you're standing at the curb and you hold down a button, like the vehicle will come to you and drive to you. And from
Okay.
a security perspective, we weren't able to really break anything there, but like it implies that like, hey, like this is definitely possible over the internet, like over, you know, your phone, right? And even though we're not able to break it, it's like still interesting because like we're kind of getting there where like if you know if all these other companies start implementing it, like I feel like they're going to suffer to the same kind of vulnerabilities if they're not implementing correctly. And I'm kind of worried about like the future, right? Where like all these other car companies start to do that.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable. I'm here in San Francisco where, geez, in the last just couple of months, we've had these Waymo cars driving around for years, but always with somebody in the driver's seat. And now there's nobody in the driver's seat. I've been at intersections where multiple Waymos are coming. They're pretty remarkable, I have to say. Like the other day I was on one of those narrow streets and one was coming the other way, and it totally handled the situation properly. But we're just ratcheting up the amount of functionality in these vehicles tremendously. And I imagine you're familiar with like the OWASP API Security Top 10. And gosh, I just on this conversation and certainly within your blog, I feel like you've covered almost all of them, right? There's OWASP number 1, which is the authorization issue. So clearly, you were able to access the records of other users that you should not be able to see. There's OWASP 2 on broken authentication, where clearly you were able to hack your way in, or in many cases, with nothing more than a VIN or an email, gain access to records, excess data exposure, even third-party risks and the like. So I guess the OWASP Top 10 exists for a good reason, and you've demonstrated how very real these risks are. We actually have a course on APIsec University called API Security Fundamentals, and in fact, maybe I'll just pop to that slide real quick. But this fundamentals course, goes through like OWASP Top 10, and it goes through a lot of real world breach scenarios. And I presented this last week at a financial banking conference, and it was remarkable how eye-opening it was for the audience to see how real these API risks and breaches are. And I think your research shines a light on that as well. So for everyone on the call, highly recommend checking out the fundamentals course. Our good friend Corey Ball created our flagship course, API penetration testing course, which is a really incredibly deep, hands-on, hardcore course. So for everyone on the call, check it out. All these courses are free. They offer certifications and the like. And before we open it up for some audience questions here, I kind of wanted to talk to you a little bit about like what was the response from the companies. Like I know that you reported pretty much all your findings to the relevant organizations. Were they responsive? Were they cooperative? Did any sort of push back on your findings? Did you retest all of these things later?
Yeah, I mean, all the team's responses were really great. We weren't doing this for money, and all their findings were basically reported for like free via email, right? So like all the teams kind of like immediately responded within like at the very max, like a week, I think was the longest way to wait. The biggest issue we had, I think, was a lot of times there'd be like a language barrier. So for instance, like if you email like Toyota, and you report a security vulnerability, it's probably going to go through like Toyota Japan. So
yeah.
all the teams were super appreciative. There's like kind of this, yeah, I would just say good responses from everybody.
Yeah, well, that's good to hear. We hear stories where some vulnerability is found. There's one example comes to mind. I won't name them, but they found an open endpoint that provided access to the entire customer database. They ignored the report. Eventually, after they got nagged enough, they added authentication, which did not actually solve the problem because now you just authenticated with a free account and you still got access to the entire database. Let me just sort of wrap up here. I mean, look, were there before we open it up, but were there some car makers you just couldn't hack? I mean, were there some good examples of solid security that you were finding out there?
Subaru, I don't know. Subaru was tough. Couldn't find like too much. We ended up finding like 1 or 2 issues, but never anything like super serious. We'd hacked Tesla before, so we weren't like super keen on like re-exploring it. But like Tesla's APIs are like super hardened. There's a few where like their overall attack surface is very like secure, but they may have like had a few issues to like bypass stuff. But yeah, overall like Subaru, Tesla, I would say, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's good. It's good to know that some were super hardened. And looking at some of these questions that we've got here, and thank you everyone for all these questions. One of them I'm trying to find where it is here on the list, but there's a question about where do you draw the line between internal and external APIs? And I think, most people would say, oh, well, is it public facing or not public facing? But you have some examples in there that I found quite illuminating where like, geez, this really looks like an internal API, but suddenly it's not, and you're able to access it. Can you talk about that or, share an example or
It's
two?
really fascinating. Like the model, like I honestly feel like the model of like internal external is kind of like a threat to security because like we've kind of been having this problem for like a really long time, right? Like if you drop me on like a network like 20 years ago, you have the difference between like external and internal, and like it creates this barrier. Like now it's like really interesting with
Yep.
like web apps, right? Where you have an external API that's just like a proxy to an internal API where like that's like, dev-corp.internal.com versus like, www.whatever.com. And they just kind of talk to each other, right? So like even though you have an internal API, you have this external facing bit and they kind of just collaborate. And at that point it's like it's suspicious to me because it's like, all right, you have this internal model and you built like this internal API and you're assuming that people can't call it directly, and that's great, right? People can't call it directly. But then you've created this proxy that breaks that barrier. And even though you have that specific URL that's internal to the network, you're basically creating this model where it's like commonplace to like have that transactional relationship with it. And then there's like all these other APIs that run alongside it internally. Like instead of, the API that we're initially supposed to talk to, it's sometimes possible to just like pivot, via like host injection or like just open redirects or like SSRF or just anything there where we can call like another API. And then when that happens, like you've broken the whole model between like internal, external, and it creates like this huge funnel of room for like authorization issues and just PII stuff. And like, it's really, really bad. I would say like the difference between the both, I think the question is like, you could probably dive into that question and like really find like a good answer. But I think the appropriate thing is just like approaching everything, depending on like what is accessible or what you could pivot to. Because if we keep separating it, it's gonna like turn into this world of I don't know. We're gonna continue having the same issues.
Yeah. Well, and it brings up a question, right? And you've been in cyber for a while. There's this, organizations typically have a security team, right? It's a different part of the organization. So you got development, you've got ops, and then security is this whole other organization, right? And security technologies and security programs tend to do things like, look at your source code or scan for vulnerabilities or sit in line, right? And watch the traffic and try to flag attacks or malicious behavior or things that don't look right. But based on what you've found, right, like all your research and all the work that you've done, where do you think the gap exists in security, right? Because clearly, like every one of these companies that you talk to, and just FYI, it looks like you're on mute. It looks like, I'm sure they all have WAFs. I'm sure they all were doing source code analysis and container analysis and third-party code and web scanning, and yet you were still able to start and stop engines and lock and unlock. So where do you think that gap exists that needs to be addressed, that needs to be filled?
Yeah, I think if I knew like the appropriate like best answer to that, I'd have started a security company and be selling that service. But I don't know. I think like realistically, like with these companies in particular, like I think the gap just exists for like the core kind of like actual. I'll actually just take a step back, right? If I gave you the correct tools, like you could go right now and build like a super secure API, right? Like you basically if you were to recreate this from the ground up, you could basically like create the most secure version of it. That'd be like really, really hard to hack, right? But I think like the gap is actually in like budgeting and time restrictions, right? So for this product in particular, like vehicle telematics, I think there's like it's very competitive to have like the first release of this, right? Like if I'm Kia and I want to sell, someone a car, and I don't have telematics, it's kind of like a bummer, right? People would rather buy a car that you can like remotely manage your mobile app, right? So you kind of throw these developers this problem and like, we need this fast, right? So then you have these developers working on this product, and maybe the security team, when they normally have like 2 weeks to review it, they only get like 1 week to review it. And then like you create all these budgetary issues and like trying to get this product shipped. And then because, your executives want to be at a conference, they want to go on stage and say, this is our mobile app.
Yeah, sure.
And I think that,
look at our new shiny features and so
yeah.
forth. Well, and the one thing is the budget and the other is the time, right? And what's time consuming? I mean, clearly the work that you did to really analyze and to explore the functionality and to craft these different, attack approaches, that's time consuming, right? And that, if you're gonna do that, you might be delaying that release to the market and so forth. But what I see here, like with you, like with Corey Ball, like the need to hack your stuff, hack your APIs, to really pressure test them and find where those vulnerabilities are before someone else comes along and takes advantage of them. So that's, one of the reasons why we started APIsec U with the pen testing course, right? And it really kind of arms people with the knowledge and the expertise to go out and do a lot of the types of stuff that you were able to do. I see questions in the chat around like, how do I build a lab? How do I go about learning it? You can certainly follow Sam, great guy to keep in touch with. Our pen testing course is another great place to get started. A lot of questions about like, is this recorded? Are we sharing the slides? There's not much in the slides, but we're gonna post this recording on YouTube by tomorrow. So if you have trouble hearing us or anything like that, we'll be certainly making that available. Let me just wrap up real quick here. I see another question, like, do IoT APIs behave similar to web APIs? Are they unique and different? Do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, 100%. So IoT API is actually kind of fun because like, if I like a little like, Amazon Ring device that has like a limited hardware and battery life, I want everything to be like as battery saving as possible, right? So maybe instead of using Apache, I use like a custom, Python web server that isn't like battle tested. So I think a lot of the web APIs, like they may be running like similar stuff, but they have these like constraints, right? And the constraints kind of create like these interesting security problems because like, now instead of my lock generating like a very secure crypto algorithm or something, it's using like a simple algorithm to conserve battery life, right? So, but the actual core APIs themselves, they're very similar. They're REST APIs, they exist on a network. And if there's like cross-device communication, there's a lot of similarities. And you could definitely have the same approach.
Well, that's interesting. A lot of security vulnerability scanners tend to focus on the UI layer, right? To do fuzzing and just manipulating the the functionality on the UI. We know, of course, what you've done and what hackers do is bypass that UI and go straight to the API. So we're big fans of API first testing. I think Corey Ball kind of taught me that and coined that phrase. I like this question from Alex. How do you feel about motorcycle and scooter security? Thinking it's time for a Vespa. It's not a bad way if you're worried about security.
I think like the security bit's probably a little better because there's less functionality, but I don't know, the safety of motorcycles is a little I love motorcycles, so yeah, super fun.
You and me both. Well, maybe you just have to get an unconnected car. Something 10 years old, 20 years old, something like
Yeah, exactly. There's a question. There's actually a slide deck that I'll release with like a talk. But one of the questions when we gave that talk was like, what year do I have to buy a vehicle to like prevent? And I was like, it's like probably like 1940s. Like anything made past like the 90s probably even has like a chip put into it. It's like super interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, at least back in the 90s, you would have needed physical access to the vehicle, I presume. Yeah. And I love this one from Al. Possible collab course with Sam. Oh boy, would we love to do something like that, Sam? So plant the seed there. I think with that, we'll wrap up here. I wanted to say a huge thank you to you, Sam. The work that you've done, I think, is really critical. You've shined a light on the risks that exist with APIs, and you've shown how this is not theoretical, right? For years, Gartner's been saying APIs will be =1 attack vector. We've got, Akamai saying 90+% of all internet traffic is APIs. When I was at this webinar or this conference last week, telling people why they should hack their banking APIs, you could see the light bulbs going off for folks, and it's almost like the elephant in the room. We spend a fortune on ransomware and malware and for good reason, right? These are good technologies, but when you look at actual successful breaches, it seems like an awful lot of them are coming through APIs, and it's not your classic injection attacks or cross-site scripting. Like, I didn't see a lot of that in your report. I saw logic flaws and access control issues in revealing data in responses that shouldn't be in there. You have this one example. I don't even know how you got there. I'll just ask you this last question for you before we wrap. You had one where you were trying to bypass authentication. You were trying all these usernames and passwords, and then you tried a username with a %0D, like a carriage return. So you prepended the endpoint with this character, and suddenly you had access to everything. Like, how? I can't even imagine what the inspiration was to try that. But what's the logic behind
Yeah,
that?
so it's exactly what we were talking about before. Like, if I have an external API that talks to an internal API, there's like this weird middle layer where like it gets translated in between, right? And if you have like a JOT, for instance, or JWT that has like a signed email payload where it's like admin@admin.com, right? And it takes that email and it sends it via an HTTP request like internally. There's like a lot of issues between there where like, if I'm forming an HTTP request, the new line character is often just like dropped and removed and ignored because like it translates it and it's like, okay, we've added a carriage return, and then it adds space HTTP /1.1, right? But the inspiration behind that is basically like, if we can match the email to the internal API where it like asks like, oh, does this user have access to this resource? Then you can bypass the authorization for it, right? So when we were testing that, we're like kind of just fuzzing it a lot. Sorry, it's beeping, I swear. I'm in the downstairs of like a hotel right now. I asked if they had a meeting room, and then kind of just hanging out downstairs, but
Oh, no worries, no worries. Well, listen, I want to thank you sincerely for your time here today. Everyone on the call, please follow Sam. He's at Sam WCYO. Really interesting guy to follow and keep track of all the great stuff that you're working on. We are actually doing a little special giveaway. We always like to offer something to our audience, our community here. And so we've got a technology that does some automated API testing, automated scanning. In fact, Christine, I need you to fix the URL. But we'll make sure this URL goes live here shortly. But APIsecuniversity.com/hackingcars. What you can do there is you can actually post an API. You can provide the documentation, and we'll actually do some looking for broken auth, looking for other types of issues in your application. So invite everyone to give that a try here. But again, Sam, thanks so much. Thanks for being part of this. And for everyone on the call, we'll be posting this to YouTube here if you want to share it or watch it again. And we recommend you all take a look at our courses here on APIsec University and take advantage.
yeah, super.
Thanks again, Sam. Appreciate it.
Yeah, super. Thank you for having me, and like I really appreciate everybody coming. And it's like kind of cool to be able to talk about this. But cheers.
Yeah, it's a super interesting topic. I think there's a lot of interest in cars, especially. It's something that affects all of us. So thanks again, and thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll talk again soon.